What's up guys, Russ from Boat Crafters. So if you're new here, my name is Russ. I run a boat restoration company in Boynton Beach, Florida called Boat Crafters Company. It's boatcrafterscompany.com and my Instagram is Boat Crafters Collective. So if you watch the first 3 episodes on my YouTube channel, you would have seen some of the little projects that I'm working on in the shop. So I decided to kind of change the format a little bit, and I'm gonna start kind of doing the same thing, but in each video I'm going to focus on one specific project. So today, if you watched episode 3, then I talked about top coating these short run molds that I made for a client. So first, the big project on the agenda today is going to be laminating these parts. So in this video I'm going to walk through step by step how I prep this mold and then lay the glass, kind of talk about the lamination schedule, the materials and such that I use for that. If you're curious about how I made these molds or the materials that I use to make these molds, you can go back to episode 3 and I talk about that a little bit. So these are freshly top coated. I need to do a little bit of prep work to them before I can make the part, but that's going to be the main focus for my project today. But I have a handful of other small things that need to get done. That project's actually relatively small, so it shouldn't take me that long. But I need to pop off this part that I made. I think this was also in episode 3, so this is an anchor hatch that I made for a customer. So I'm gonna pop this off the mold first so I can get this lamination room cleared out. Also need to do some laser work for a close friend of mine. I need to cut this paper template for a friend of mine. This is a template. So this is a panel out of a skiff, and my friend does rigging and electronics, and he wanted me to remake this panel. So he drops this off, and he tells me that this needs to be in the exact right spot. The gauges need to be in the exact right spot. And then he wanted to extend it over about 5 inches, but the control binnacle needs to be in the exact spot that it is in the boat, so that when he puts the panel in, he doesn't have to cut the fiberglass console again. He needs it to drop right in. So in this case, what I would do is I would make a paper template, and then he takes it to the boat, test it, and make sure everything lines up, so that when I cut the acrylic, we make sure that the final piece is going to fit. Before I go and waste acrylic, I make a bunch of templates out of paper. Oh, I got hiccups. So I need to do that. That's first thing I need to get out of the way, because I actually been putting that off for a couple days, and he wants to come pick it up today. All right, in the laser room, and I have it all set up. I have the heavy paper in the laser machine, the files all uploaded, so just gonna zip this off real quick. All right, I don't know what happened. My microphone died, but there we go. There's a new template cut, ready for him to pick up. So that's one project off my plate for today. Just gonna pop this anchor hatch off this mold, and this is another thing I need to do later, is I'm gonna have to trim up this part and get it boxed up to ship to the customer. So I'm just gonna use the plastic wedges to pop this off. Looks like everything came out good. There's a little imperfection here. I got a little alligation in this corner. You can see right here the little alligation, and that happens when I didn't put enough gel coat in this area. So the gel coat was probably thin in that area. I just missed it. So when you put your resin on, it kind of starts to dissolve the gel coat, and it causes that problem. But not a big deal. All of these hatches get refinished anyways. So before I ship it to the customer, I'll just lightly sand that and patch it, and it'll be good to go. But the rest of it is in really good shape. The lid came out really, really good. A little mark right there, just because there's a little small crack in my mold. So now next step would be to just trim this up and trim the inside, and then trim around the outside, and then put it in a box and ship it to the customer. All right, started to prep up these molds to get ready to lay apart. So I just went through and waxed both of these pieces and taped up the edges. So the reason I tape up the edges is so you just don't get resin buildup along the edge of the mold. Kind of just keeps it in better condition for longer. And I tape the center as well because I'm only going to be glassing up to here, and the center is going to get trimmed out anyway, so it just keeps the mold clean in the center. So I already started to mix up the gel coat, so now I need to get my suit on and my respirator and shoot that gel coat, let that sit for a couple hours, and then start to lay the glass in a little bit. All right, so I'm all suited up. I don't know how well the microphone's gonna work when I'm in my suit. So got the gel coat in my cup, in my paper cup. I think I mixed about half of this, so maybe like 20 ounces or so, and that should be more than enough to coat these two molds. So if you've never used a gel coat dump gun before, it'll only come out of the gun if it's pointed downwards. So the trick to, if I flip this upside down right now, the gel coat's just gonna run out of the tip of the gun. So we want to avoid that. So what I'll do is I'll pull the trigger while it's pointed upwards and then flip it over so that we're shooting material as soon as it starts to flow out of the tip. All right, so I got the gel coat on there pretty good. Just want to make sure that you get all the edges really, really well. So now I'm just going to let this sit for a couple hours. All right, so I don't know what happened with this part of the video. It just didn't record the audio to my GoPro, not the GoPro, but my new action camera. But I have all the glass cut. The gel coat's been curing for a couple hours, and it's tacky enough to where I can start laying the resin over the top of it. All right, so it's hard for me to remember what it was I was exactly saying in this video, but this here I'm pointing out the core material that I'm using, and this is a 4mm core mat. It's just a really thin coring material. It doesn't really function like a foam coring material does, whereas this gets laid into the mold in between the different layers of chop strand and 1708, and you just fully saturate it with resin, and it kind of acts like a 1/4-inch foam material, but it's just a lot easier to lay into this part. So by adding the core mat, it's going to make this lid significantly stronger without me adding a ton more glass to attain the same amount of strength. All right, so here I'm just talking about the putty that I'm going to be using to fill in the radius on the mold. So before I start any lamination, the first thing I do is mix up a putty. Here I'm using an isophthalic putty, but sometimes I use a vinyl ester thickened putty. And I just take and mix up the putty and then put it into a piping bag or a cake decorating bag. And I just put the putty in the tight radius. And then the first step is to take 3/4 ounce chopped strand, and then just put over the top of that putty, and it pushes it into the radius, and it makes laminating these parts a lot easier, because you don't have to be as precise and critical with your roller, making sure that that first skin layer gets into the radius, because the putty just kind of pushes itself into the corner, and it kind of takes a lot of the guesswork out of it and makes laminating these hatches with tight corners kind of foolproof. All right, so I just mixed up the radius putty. I have it in my cake bag. I'm not going to go through that in that material. If you're curious about this material and what it is that I'm using, you can go back to my previous episode and I talk about it quite a bit. So the first step is just going to be getting this putty onto this mold in these radius areas. So I'm not going to be able to really touch the camera, obviously, because I'm going to have a lot of resin on my hands. So I'm going to try to move the camera around and adjust it the best that I can so that you can see what I'm doing each step, but hopefully the camera angle that I have right now is good enough. So some of the things that I'm going to do here, and I'll try to point them out. If you're doing this at home, it might be a bit of a challenge for you because this room is air conditioned. And I've had the air conditioning running in here for probably the past 2 hours, so it's pretty cool in here. I'm not really sure what the temperature is, but I would guess it's probably low to mid 70s right now. But as I keep going, my vent fan's going to pull the cold air out, so it's going to get warmer in here as we go. And the reason I bring that up is because if you're doing these parts yourself, you have to be mindful of the temperature, because I'm going to put a lot of glass on these parts all in one shot, and I can get away with that because of the resin that I'm using and because I have the air conditioning. So by having the air conditioning, after I finish this job, I'm going to leave the air conditioning running, and it's going to slow down the catalyzation of the resin so that the resin doesn't get overly hot. If the resin gets really hot, especially in the lid, what's going to happen is it's going to warp. The heat, it's going to put so much heat into the part that it's going to warp. And because I'm putting all the glass on in one shot, that would happen to you if you tried to put all the glass on your part in one shot. If you're working outside, depending on where you live, depending on what the temperature is, but if it's over like upper 70s to 80-ish degrees, you're going to get a lot of exotherm heat from the resin by putting more and more layers on. So you have to be cautious. You'll have to adjust how much glass you can put on in one shot based on what kind of resin you're using and what the temperature is that you're working in. I would tend to always go on the safe side and just try not to put down like more than 1/8 of an inch of glass in one shot. So I mixed up too much putty, and now I gotta throw it in the garbage, which I hate doing that. All right, so I'm not gonna be able to see my face through most of this, but as I do the lid, I'll move the camera back and forth to each of the parts. So I have my resin gun all primed up, ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to spray a light coat of resin over the top of this, and then I'm going to get my first pieces and get them in place. So this hatch is going to get a layer of 3/4 ounce chopped strand mat first. So that's what I'm going to put down first. The reason I'm putting the 3/4 ounce chop strand mat on the gutter is because of the shape of the gutter. The 3/4 ounce chop strand mat is going to lay over those curves a lot easier than 1.5 ounce chop strand mat does. So it just makes things a lot easier to do. So I'm just setting this glass on here, getting it in place, and then I'm going to wet it out again with the resin gun and then let it sit. Then I'm going to move over to the lid and I'm going to do the first layer on the lid. So I'll let if you're going to do this and you're working out of a bucket, it's going to be a little bit different. So if I was mixing resin in a bucket, then I would have to come over here with the chip brush and kind of just brush it onto these pieces and wet them out. So the workflow is a little bit different if you're working out of a bucket or working with a resin gun. When I started this company, I worked out of a bucket, and it's very, very challenging. So I pre-cut my pieces to be about 5 inches bigger than the size. So this is a 22 by 22. I cut my pieces to be 26 by 26. So that'll be enough for the piece to lay into the part and then hang up over the edges. So something I just wanted to point out is on my big sheets of glass, what I do is I make a relief cut in the corners. So you can see right here there's a cut that goes into there on all the corners. And that allows these pieces to drop down into that radius without bunching up. If I didn't cut that, I'd have to stretch the chop strand mat to get down into that corner, and it makes it a lot more difficult. By making the cut, these pieces will kind of overlap themselves and will make it a lot easier to tuck that glass into that corner. On these small parts, it's not as big of an issue, but when you have a deeper recessed, like my standard lids are 1.5 inches thick, this is only 3/4 inch thick, so it's a lot easier on this than it is on the bigger ones, but still cutting the relief piece in it makes it easier to push the glass down. So I have my cup with lacquer thinner in it, so I just keep my chip brush in the lacquer thinner to keep the brush clean as I'm going. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get this stretched out and start to get the resin pushed down into the edge of this lid. So you want to go slowly. You don't want to like really force the chop strand mat too quickly. You want to wait for the resin to dissolve the styrene binder that's in the chop strand mat, and then the glass is just going to fall down into place really, really easily. So if I shot the resin and then I immediately came in here and started poking with with my chip brush, it's just going to make all the pieces shift and move, and it's not going to fall into place. So I have this putty in these corners underneath this glass, so it makes it a lot easier for me to do this because I don't really have to worry too much if I have the glass pushed into the corner. If you were doing this without the radius putty, you would have to use 3/4 ounce chop strand mat because there's just really no way that you can get 1.5 ounce chop strand mat to lay into a tight radius like this without having potential for air pockets. I mean, you can do it, but I feel like it's a 50-50. You might have air pockets, you might not. Doing the putty, I feel like, is a critical step, especially for a DIY person. Doing the putty in the radius is going to make your life a lot easier. So I also have my bucket here with lacquer thinner in it, and this has my rolling tools in it. just going to roll this all out, make sure that everything's flat, all the air pockets are out. This is a critical step too. I think a lot of people skip the part where they roll it out. And especially in the lids in the center, if you don't roll it out, you get little micro air pockets in the surface of the lid. And the shitty part with that is you may not even see it when you pull the part out of the mold. The air pockets might not even pop up till like maybe like a month after you install it, and then you have an air pocket that you have to fix. So taking your time in this stage will make sure that you don't end up with air pockets after you install it and paint it. So I'm just going to take my smaller roller and just lightly go around and push the glass into that putty. Just making sure that there's really no like micro air pockets underneath that putty, the putty in the glass. I hope the audio is okay on this because it's underneath my face mask, obviously. All right, that's good. All right, now I'm back over to the gutter, and this 3/4 ounce chop strand mat's been sitting here for a few minutes. Now it's just going to be real easy to push this down into that putty. So when you're walking out this glass, you want to try to move in one direction so you can push all the air pockets to one side. If you like start and you're like jumping around, you're going to create air pockets in the middle of your lamination. You want to try to avoid that. So you can see that I'm not trying to push the glass into place on my first pass with my chip brush. I wanted to like gradually have the chop strand mat just fall into place. I don't want to force it. If it doesn't want to go, then stop, because you're just going to put a crease in the chop strand mat and it's going to cause a mess. So you can see here where this piece and this piece didn't overlap, so I have an exposed part of the mold right here. I do that on purpose because if I was going to have this piece overhang this edge and then this piece overhang this edge, trying to get these two pieces to lay down around this corner here is going to be very, very difficult. It's better to just lay your pieces straight and then come back and just peel off pieces of the chop strand mat and then put this in place afterwards. All right, so now that I have the big pieces in place, I got some of this 3/4 ounce chop strand, and I'm just going to tear off pieces, and I'm going to lay it here on the corners to cover these spots of the mold where the glass didn't overlap. And by peeling off the chop strand with the edges loose and frayed, it's going to make it lay down really, really easily. When you straight cut your glass, this edge is going to always have a tendency to want to lift. So if you can have the edge of your glass like this, these pieces of glass, they act as anchors, so that will grab on to whatever it is that you're trying to mold this around. It's a lot easier to work with than working with a straight cut. So this part of the process, this is the most critical part of building your part, because if you get this wrong, that's going to determine, it's going to have a huge determining factor on the quality of your part. And again, it just goes back to avoiding air pockets. Having air pockets in your part is the worst, because they may not even show up until months later, and then you spend all this time installing this part into your boat, and then the first time somebody walks on it, an air pocket pops up, and that's very, very frustrating. So if you rush this part of the process, it will bite you in the ass later, promise me.
I promise you. So I'm doing both of these parts at the same time. I'm doing the lid and the gutter at the same time. And I can do it again, like I said, because I have the air conditioning and I have the right resin, and I've been doing this for a long time, so I'm very efficient. But if you're new to this and you have no experience, I would suggest doing one piece at a time, especially if you're mixing resin in a bucket, because you have to remember, I'm pulling the trigger and the resin's coming out of the gun. If you're mixing in a bucket, you have to go over and mix batches of resin. If you're doing this by hand with a bucket, I would suggest mixing small amounts of resin, like probably 8 to 12 ounces per batch, so that you don't have the resin heating up in your cup, and then you have the resin kicking off really fast in your cup, and that's going to make it even harder for you. So if you can mix really small batches, you won't have to deal with that issue with the exotherm causing the resin to kick in the cup. Also, you can adjust the catalyst percentage, but for people that are new, I would tend to stay around 2% if you can. Maybe if you can get to like 1.5%, that's fine. But if you go any lower than that, then you risk the issue of under-catalyzation. So I'm just using my big roller here first to make sure that the pieces on this flange are flat. Then I'm going to take the small roller and just gently kind of push the glass into the putty just to make sure that the pockets are gone. All right, there we go. The skin layer on this is done. So I'm gonna move back over to this. I'm gonna because the temperature is so cool in here, this isn't gonna really kick. It might start to gel just a little bit, but it's gonna take a while for this to kick just because of the percentage that I'm mixing the resin. So I'm just gonna let it sit. It will start to gel up a little bit, and that's gonna allow it to hold into the pocket so that when I come back and put the next pieces of glass on, I don't have to worry about pulling the glass out of place. If you were doing this at home, what I would suggest would be to walk away from this for maybe like 15 or 20 minutes, and you keep checking it. And right as it starts to get kind of firm, then I would start with your next steps. Because what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that the glass is locked into place. So once it starts to cure, it can't pull back out. If it's still wet, and you go to put more glass over it, and then you're rolling it, you might accidentally pull the glass out from the bottom layer from the radius that you just spent a bunch of time putting it in place. So when I first started this, I would do the skin layer, and then I would walk away from it, and then let it start to kick, and then I would start the rest of the glass process. But I'm going to move back over here to the lid. So the next piece of lamination is going to be the 1708. And I'm going to put the shiny side down, and the reason why I'm doing that is because the next layer is going to be the core layer, and I want the core layer to be touching the chop strand mat. By flipping it upside down, the shiny side is still going to be touching the chop strand mat here. So in this scenario, so you would always, in most lamination processes, put the shiny side up and the chop strand mat part down. But if you think about it, we're building this part in reverse. So I'm going to be flipping it over so that this part is going to be up touching the chop strand that I just put down, and then the chop strand part is going to be facing up. Then I'm going to put the core on top of it. So I'm going to pre-wet the shiny side and then flip it over. So what happened there is there was no catalyst coming out of my gun. So I have some issues with the catalyst pump on my machine, but I use red MEKP in my machine so I can tell if I pull the trigger, if it's not red, then I know that the catalyst isn't coming out. I need to fix my catalyst pump. So you can see there the red is now coming out. So now I'm going to flip this over. And we're putting the shiny side down. So with the 1708, I like to roll it out first before I take and push the pieces into the corners, because what's going to happen is once I push that glass down into the corner and then I lay it flat on the top of the flange, the 1708 is kind of going to lock itself into place. So if I end up with an air pocket here in the middle, it's going to be hard for me to push that air pocket out because the glass is going to be locked. It has itself locked against the mold already. So before I push these down, I'm going to roll all the air out of the center of the 1708. So you can see how the relief cuts make it really easy for the material to drop down into that corner. All right, so now that I have all the center area nice and no air pockets, now I can push down the top and lock the 1708 into place. All right, so the next step is the core mat that I mentioned earlier. It looks like the camera's having a hard time in here with the light, but that's what the core mat looks like. So I'm going to shoot the back side of it and then flip it over. So core mat holds a lot of resin, so we're going to have to saturate this, and then I'm going to just walk away from it. So I'm going to roll this out first, just to get any of the bubbles out of the core mat and to kind of soak that resin into the bottom. So core mat's a great material to use if you're building a part and you want to have strength. Add a lot of strength without adding a lot of thickness or a lot of weight. You'd be surprised at how strong this is if you were able to laminate this on a flat table with just like a piece of 1708 on both sides, it would be pretty strong. But a lot of times this is used inside when you're building a console to reinforce the large sections of a console, like the sides with just a large amount of glass. Instead of using coring foam, which adds a lot of extra time to the process by installing coring foam into a console. So this core mat's going to suck up the resin quite a bit, so we want to make sure that it just looks wet. So as long as you got a little bit of it kind of still showing on the surface, then you know that it's saturated pretty well. All right, so that's going to be enough on that. All right, so this is just going to be the glass for the flange. So it's going to be 2 pieces on this side, 2 pieces on that side. So I'm only overlapping these pieces of glass here just a little tiny bit. You don't want to have a huge overlap, because what's going to happen is you're just going to end up with a ton of glass right here in this corner, and then you'll end up with this area getting really, really hot, and it's going to be even more thick. So you want to make sure you plan and cut your glass accordingly so it doesn't overlap too much. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the second piece down. If you were doing this DIY, I would suggest rolling out the bottom piece first, and then putting the top piece on. Having the resin gun allows me to do certain things that I wouldn't be able to do if I was working out of a bucket. Because the nice thing is the resin doesn't start to catalyze until I pull the trigger. So I have a lot more time to work than I do if I'm working out of a bucket. All right, so that's the 2 pieces on the flange. Now I'm going to put the pieces on the gutter. So these are all 22 by 22 pieces. And I want to cut them to make sure that this piece doesn't overhang this edge of the mold, because if it overhangs, I'm going to have a hard time pushing it down around that corner, and it's just going to slow me down. So I'm going to cut it, this edge, to make sure that this piece is not longer than the longest side of the mold. So I'm just going to wait a few minutes because I want the styrene and the resin to start to dissolve the binder in the chop strand mat. So it'll make it a lot easier for me to push this down into the part. So you might always tend to be in a rush and you just want to keep moving, but if you're just patient, it's going to make your life a lot easier. All right, so I still have the issue here with the exposed edge on the mold where the glass didn't overlap. So I'm just going to take a 3/4 ounce chop strand mat and come in and put it down here on this corner so that I can link the 2 pieces together. All right, so the final step on this is going to be the 1708. So I'm going to flip it upside down, wet the bottom. Always wet the chop strand on your 1708 before you put it down, because if not, then you have to push your resin through the top layer of the biax before it'll reach the chop strand mat layer, and it just takes a lot longer. If you just wet the chop strand mat out first, then put your glass into place, it just will make it go a lot faster. So the thing with 1708 is, because it's the shiny side, obviously, the glass is all stitched together, so you can take your brush and brush the 1708 and it won't pull the chop strand mat apart. You can brush chop strand mat a little bit, but if you put any pressure on it, it's just going to pull the fibers apart. So really with chop strand you can only do the tapping method, but with 1708 you can take the brush and walk the air pockets out. So it makes it go a little bit faster. So on this final layer of 1708, I usually take and cut little notches in it, and what that is for is so that when it overhangs here, this piece will be a lot easier to put into place because it has the relief cut. So this is the only piece that I cut where it overhangs the edge of the mold. Because this is the last piece, and I'm pretty confident that the pieces underneath it are all in place, I don't put a ton of time into making sure that this layer of 1708 is perfectly wet out. I mean, you might get some small air pockets in it and whatnot, but it's not a huge deal. The 1708 is really just kind of adding some rigidity to the part. I mean, you don't want to be super sloppy with it, but you don't have to get crazy with the roller, making sure that all the air pockets are removed. So because I wet out the bottom quite a bit, I don't really need that much resin on the top. So I'm going to lock this bottom part into place by pushing it with the chip brush, and then I'm going to take and I'm going to walk it around the corner, and that's going to allow the fibers in the biax to kind of shift and slide and stretch, and this 1708 is just going to wrap right around this corner. All right, so that's pretty much it. Now I'm just going to roll this out, get all these bubbles out of this flange here. All right, move the camera into a better spot. I should have done that the first time. But this has been sitting here for a little while. It's still really saturated because it's cool in here. Not really worried about it getting too hot. So if you were in this stage and you were doing this part and you put your hand over the top of this and you could feel the heat coming out of the part, you would want to wait. Because if you put more glass over the top of this, because this core mat is holding a lot of resin. So once it starts to get to its kicking stage, it's going to put out a lot of heat. And so you don't want to put more over the top of it, but that's just going to make it worse. And what's going to happen is it's going to cause the whole part to warp, and it'll probably pre-release itself. And then when you pull the lid out, the lid's going to be crooked. So you need to kind of monitor the temperature of your resin and make sure that if you have any hot spots, you just got to be patient and wait before you move forward. So this layer is another layer of 1708, but it's going to be opposite because now I have this core layer. I want to make sure that the chop strand layer touches the core layer so it creates a good bond. If I put the shiny layer onto the core mat, the bond between the shiny layer and the core mat isn't going to be as good. So I'm going to wet the chop strand side mat and flip it over, which is opposite of how I did it on the bottom side of the coring. So the same thing on this layer is I'm rolling out all the air bubbles from the center before I lock the edges of the 1708 into place. So I personally think that this is enough lamination for this lid. I could very well stop here, and I think it would be more than enough, especially for this hatch, because it's not going to be going on a deck and nobody's going to be walking on it. But I'm going to add one more layer of chop strand mat to the back of it anyways, just to give it one more layer between, a little bit more glass between the back side of the lid and this core mat. One last layer. So one thing to note right here, if you can see, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, but this piece of chop strand mat, it doesn't want to lay down. It's because it's a straight scissor cut edge. So if I push it down, it just wants to flip back up again. So if you run into this issue in the middle of your project, which you're going to run into that issue at some point, what you would do is just take some 3/4 ounce chop strand mat and peel it off so you have nice frayed edges, and just put it over the top of that. And then those frayed edges are going to act like anchors, and it's going to hold that piece down. If this had happened to me earlier, I would have to address that, because then if I came back to do more lamination and this piece started to cure and it was popped up, now I can't put glass over the top of that. It's just always going to get in the way. So at any point in your project, if you have pieces that don't want to lay flat, just take and tear pieces of chop strand and put it over the top of it and anchor it down. So we're looking pretty good on this, pretty much done. All right, so that's a wrap. This lid is done. I'm going to leave the air conditioning running. Don't want this to get too hot, because there's a lot of glass and a lot of resin and that core mat in there, so there's a lot of material in here. It is cooler today. It rained earlier, but I'm still going to leave the AC running just to slow down the catalyzation. And this here, I don't have to worry about it really. It's good to go. So, all right, so that's going to be a wrap today. I think it's about 7 o'clock, so I'm going to clean up the shop, close up, and I'll pop those pieces off tomorrow.